Okay, I will start. I will open the floor right now. Many hands are up. And please, one question only and a short question, please. We have only 40 minutes of time. First hand I saw was Pio. And please introduce yourself, of course.
The governor knows me already. I'm the bosso Italian. Konnichiwa. I will be short in the question, but first allow me as an Italian with a great public deficit to tell you that contrary to politics, you cannot play with digits. And the single entry and double entry doesn't change much. We are the country that invented, I don't know if you know, double entry. Mr. Pacioli in Japan is revered. But that doesn't change. We have a huge deficit like you have. The question is on China, the country you like the most, I think. I believe that when you become older and older, you should be wiser and wiser. You have been known as a man that suggested Japan should say no to America. I read your book, I saw your movies, I respect you very much as an off-mainstream intellectual, but as a politician, I think you are going toward a totally wrong position. Wouldn't it be easier to stop the rhetoric of war, of what has gone, and hope for a rhetoric of peace? In other words, instead of keeping calling China Chugoku China, or China, like we call it, wouldn't it be the time to say yes to China?
はい、複式簿記がすべてを解決するというようなお話をされていたと思うんでございますが、実はイタリアの方で複式簿記回帰制度を発明した国なんでございますが、我々のイタリアではまだまだ大変な赤字を抱えておりますので、それがすべての問題解決にはならないかもしれません。質問でございますが、中国に関してでございます。非常に石原様を私は非常に尊敬しているわけでございます。そしてやっぱり人間といいますのは年を取りますとより聡明になるっていうのが当然ではないかと思います。昔米国に対してノーを言えるということを主張されまして、私はそれ素晴らしい本だったと思いますし、今まで石原様の本とか映画をいろいろ拝見しているわけでございます。しかしながらインテリとしましては非常に素晴らしい方だと思うんでございますが、ただ、その政治家といたしましては中国に関しましてはちょっと間違った方向に進んでいらっしゃるのではないかと懸念いたします。つまり今になっては中国、シナとよく、中国を呼ぶわけでございますが、中国に対して対立ではなく平和を求める、時期になってきているのではないかと思います。つまり、今は中国に対するイエス対してイエスを言うべきではないかと思いますが、
何についてイエスと言うんですか？
What are we supposed to say yes to? About?
We can start a debate.
中国とね、日本とはですね、その仲良く友好に進むことは両国にとって好ましいと思いますよ。ただね、そのシナがですね、今行っている覇権主義、皆さんシナって言葉悪い言葉じゃない。日本人にとっても中国ってのはね、広島県と岡山県のことなの。シナっていうのはですね、孫文が作った言葉でね、シナのですね、彼らが英語でやってるインターネットの論文読んでください。シナ人自身の論文に自分たちのことをシナ SINA って書いてありますから、皆さん調べてみたい。英語ではチャイナでしょ、フランス語はシヌでしょ、ドイツ語では何ですか？シナ。それはね、シナって悪い言葉じゃない。なんで日本人だけシナっちゃいけないんですか？でね、私はね、チベットを非常に気の毒だと思います。ダライ・ラマと非常に親しいけどもね、あの人の、ね、状況って本当に気の毒だと思います。そのチベット人はかわいそうと思います。私はね、シナの覇権主義に侵されて日本がね、第2のですね、チベットになることを絶対に好みませんなということです。だからノーという時はノーと言う。だからね、日本の外交もしっかりしたらですね、もちろんアメリカとのアライアンスは必要でしょうけども、とにかくね、その自分の領海っても侵されつつあるフィリピンとかベトナムと一緒にね、あるアライアンスを組む、それが積極的な強いしたたかな外交なんじゃないんでしょうか。それができない日本の外交に私は信用を置かないから、 ね、政府について今まで物も言ってきた、これからも言っていくつもりです。
Of course, I understand that in theory it would be better for both countries if Japan and China could get along and have a friendly, positive relationship. However, there is the reality that China is engaging in hegemony at present. And in regard to the way I refer to China, in Japanese, the traditional way or the most common way to refer to China is Chugoku, which means central country, but it also is the same name that we use for a part of Japan, which covers Hiroshima Prefecture and Okayama Prefecture. Therefore, I use the older name, Shina, which for some reason people regard this in a negative way. However, many Chinese, when they write, for example, on the internet, different papers, they refer to themselves as Sinonese. The word Sino or China, Shina, is quite often used. In French, it's referred to as Sina. I know that in English it's referred to as China. However, I believe that Shina is a completely appropriate word. But the point I want to make is that when I look at China, I think, for example, of Tibet. And I think Tibet is a country that invites tremendous sympathy. I am very close to the Dalai Lama. I am very much sympathize with the position that he finds himself in. When we consider that China may pursue its hegemonistic policies, I want to do everything in my power possible to make sure that Japan does not become a second Tibet. In other words, what I'm saying is that when Japan should speak up and say no, it should, in fact, actually say no. I think that Japanese diplomacy has not really followed these ideas very carefully. I understand, for example, that the alliance with the United States is very important. That is, of course, something that should be maintained. But other alliances can also be considered. For example, if we're talking about encroachment of territorial waters, we have common issues with, for example, the Philippines and Vietnam. We can create a common alliance with such countries as well. This would be the kind of strong, positive thinking kind of diplomacy that we need. However, the government and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have not been able to pursue such diplomacy. As a result, I've been complaining about these matters for some time, and I will continue to do so in the future.
Okay.
香港フェニックステレビのリーです。お話ありがとうございました。やはり中国に関してお聞きしたいのですが、石原代表が今まで中国に対してシナを呼ばれるなど、非常に強硬的な対中姿勢だということで知られていますが、ただ今日本政府の立場として対極から中国と冷静に対応していくといった姿勢があると思います。もし今新しい政党のリーダーとして、そして将来の総理の候補として今後も、この強硬的な対中姿勢を変える予定はないのでしょうか。それから野田総理とお会いした際に中国との間で戦争も辞さないといった発言があったと一部報道されています。これは事実だったのかどうか教えてください。
I'm from Phoenix TV. My name is Lee. Thank you very much. And I would like to ask about your attitude toward China. You are known for taking a very, very strong position or attitude toward China, for example, by referring to China not by the traditional word Chugoku, but using the word Shina. But I know that at present the Japanese government is trying to take a larger view of things and trying to deal with the current issues in a more calm and rational manner. My question, therefore, is to you. In the future, as a potential member of the government, in fact, as a potential possible prime minister, do you intend to not change your attitude toward China at all? That's my first question. And the other question is, when you met with Prime Minister Noda, it was reported that you used some strong language, specifically that you said that we should not shirk from even the idea of starting war or using physical power. Is this true or not? Did you make such a statement?
尖閣問題についてのですね、これに端を発したね、日本と中国、シナとの間の、フリクション、摩擦についてですね、国民の圧倒的な総意は冷静に毅然として迎えるということです。私はですね、その視点の通りこれからも行動します。それから野田君との会話の中でですね、そういう悪い評判が立つだろうと思ったから、私はですね、私のね、弟分の非常に親しいですね、野田君とも親しいですね、立ち上がれ日本、今度日本維新の大連合でも、 一緒に行動します園田君という非常に優れた政治家をですね同行しました。彼がですねそこで言った言葉はですね、石原さんがその戦争も辞さないとかで、戦争を辞さないであそこに兵隊を置けなんて言うかと思って私はハラハラしたけども、最低限ですね零細の漁民のためにね、あそこに船だまり、港じゃない、船をつなぐ場所とですね、それから灯台を作れって言うんだったので、それぐらいのことしたらいいじゃないですか、野田さんなんでそれはできないんですかと彼も言いました。そこで戦争も辞さないとかね、軍隊を置けなんてことは一言も言ってません。それは園田君に聞いてもらえば分かることです。
野田さんにお会いしました時に安倍さんと安倍さん、園田さん。In regard to the Senkaku Islands, I believe that this issue has now become the source of great increased frictions between Japan and China. However, I think the understanding of the majority of the people in the country is that they want to deal with it in a calm and rational manner, and a very assertive manner, but calmly. And I believe that going forward, I also want to deal with it in a calm manner. When I was to meet with Mr. Noda, I knew that there could be negative interpretations arising from this visit. So I was accompanied by Mr. Sonoda, who was also part of the Sunrise Party, Tachagara Nippon Party. And I asked him to come along. I wanted to make sure that such provocative statements as establishing a military presence on the island, or going to using war or a military force, I wanted to make sure that such words were not uttered. As a result, what I said was basically that I didn't see why some kind of a port facility, and not a full-blown port, but simply a kind of pond where small ships could take shelter in times of a storm, be built on this island, and also perhaps a lighthouse be built on this island. There was absolutely no mention of establishing a military force or going to war.
香港がね、イギリスの植民地からですね、解放されてね、返還された。しかしその香港をですね、完全に飲み込もう、統一化しようとしている、シナの政府に対して香港の人はね、非常に冷静に毅然として対応してるじゃないですか。私それを評価してますけどね。
When we talk about Hong Kong, we see that after many years of colonialism, after British control, the Hong Kong territory was returned to China, but although it has remained more or less independent, it is facing increased efforts by China to basically completely control and integrate Hong Kong into the rest of China. In regard to this, the Hong Kong people, I think, are dealing with the Chinese in a very assertive and calm manner, and that, I think, is something to be admired. Excuse me, the word that Mr. Ishihara has been using is kizento, which means resolutely or in a determined way, but the word assertive perhaps is too strong.
Malcolm Foster, the AP. You and Mr. Hashimoto, I believe, had very opposing views on some important issues confronting Japan, such as nuclear power and whether Japan should join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. And yet now you've agreed to join forces and you're even the leader of that party. Have you changed your position on those views or not? Can you clarify, do you now support shutting down nuclear plants? And if you have changed, how can you convince voters that you are a principled politician and not just an opportunistic one?
今、橋本氏と連合を組んだわけでございますが、一緒になったわけでございますが、今までは非常に政策に関しまして違う意見をお持ちだったというふうに言われていたわけでございます。特に原発に関して、また TPP に関してでございます。今一緒になりましただけではなく、同じ党の代表を務めるわけになっている、わけでございます。ということは、例えば原発政策に関しましても TPP 政策などに関しましても、意見が変わった、立場が変わったということでございますでしょうか。例えば、やっぱり脱原発政策を推進するようになったのでございますでしょうか。もし、その立場を変えたということでございますと、やはりその理念のある政治家っていうイメージをどうやって、皆様に受け入れてもらえると思いますでしょうか。日和見的な政治家に見られないようにどうする、おつもりでございますでしょうか。
政治にとってですね、 理念もね非常に大事ですけどね、理念と称するセンチメントがですね横行する。であなたの質問もね、正確な両方の情報を取ってない非常に粗雑なですね、私たちに迷惑な質問です。
When we talk about politics, of course, fundamental principles and beliefs are very, very important. But it is also very important to understand that in politics, quite often things can become very much governed by sentiment, in other words, emotions. As an example of this, I think that what your question indicates is that you have not fully researched this matter. It's a very, very rough and slipshod question, and as a result, I'm quite inconvenienced.
So what is your nationality? アメリカン。私はね TPP については、ね、原則的に賛成です。自由貿易に反対するのではありません。しかし部門によってはですね許せないものがある。例えばねアメリカがね日本に売り込もうとしているね遺伝子改良型の要するにね食べ物、これはね10年20年先どういう弊害を伴うかまだわからない。だからですね私はね首都圏を構成するね神奈川県埼玉県千葉県の3つの県、つまり首都圏の、ね、知事たちと諮ってですね東京が提唱して遺伝子改良型の食べ物にはステッカーを貼れと。値段は安いかもしれない、これはね先がわからない食べ物だというね識別をしてですね買う人がですね安いものを買うか、それとも、ね、少し高くてもね安全な当たり前の食べ物を買うかということはねその必要だと思う。ステッカーはねアメリカはそのステッカー外せと言ってるんですよ。こんな危険な食べ物で誰が責任持つんですか。私はだからこの問題については反対だ。だからね部門についてですね要するに討論したらしいんでね自由貿易は賛成ですけどね、そういう点ではですね、全面的に何もかも自由化すること非常に私危険だと思うし、アメリカの言い分は私は許せませんだ。それからね原発についてはねこれからねどんどん世界も変わっていく、日本の経済もですね変わっていく中でね10年な10年1ディケードのねこれからの経済政策をどう取るか、そのためのねシミュレーションもせずにですね、その10年のね綿密な経済計画をなしにですねそのためにですねどれだけの原発に依存するかしないかということのねその要するに分析もせずにですね原発の白か黒かという議論は乱暴だ。例えばね日本ではね皆さん覚えてるでしょうけどもかつて電力料金が上がったことがある。その瞬間ですね半年で日本のアルミニウムを作る業界潰れたんです。今ね一番電力産業は何かって鉄ですね。千葉県の大きなね鉄鋼会社はねもうね昼間の電力が高いから昼間休んで真夜中にですね安い電気料金使ってね生活してる。そういう状況を勘案しながらね日本の経済がどういうふうに構成していくかというねシミュレーションもなしにですね何十%ね原発に依存するかしないかとそういう調査をしなきゃダメじゃないかということでね全くその通りだということで橋本君と合意はしてますということです。その作業をする能力を今までの政府は持たなかった。自民党も持ってなかった。だから私はそれをしようということです。
In regard to, for example, the TPP, in principle, I'm very much in favor of free trade. However, there are in certain areas in which I cannot forgive some of the parties involved. Specifically, I'm talking about, as an example, genetically modified foods. These are still things that no one knows what will happen 10 or 20 years from now when people take in large quantities of these genetically modified foods. As a result, I spoke with the governors of the three prefectures surrounding Tokyo, Kanagawa Prefecture, Saitama Prefecture, and Chiba Prefecture. And according to a suggestion that was made by Tokyo, we decided that we would put stickers on all produce that contain genetically modified foods, even if they were less expensive, because we wanted to provide the option to the consumers that perhaps they may wish to spend more money for foods that they were able to deem safe. However, the United States government has been on us trying to get us to remove that sticker. And I'm very, very angry with such a response. I mean, I ask who's going to take responsibility for what happens 10 or 20 years from now? So again, in principle, I support free trade. However, I think there are specific areas when we must have more vigorous debate and consider the possible damages and consequences. I cannot forgive the United United States for this genetically modified foods incident, for example, and I am completely against taking just a 100% approach to freeing up all trade. In regard to nuclear power plants, I believe that the world is changing fast. The Japanese economy will change in the future. I believe that if a decision as vital as deciding what to do about nuclear power plants is going to be made, it should be done on the basis of careful analysis. A simulation should be put into place about the Japanese economy for the next 10 years, for example. Economic policies should be presented and analyzed. However, and that will give us a better idea of how dependent the Japanese economy will have to be, perhaps, on nuclear power plants in the future. Without doing this kind of analysis, without doing this kind of calculation, to immediately make a black and white decision about nuclear power plants is, I believe, dangerous and irresponsible. In the past, there was a time when electricity prices jumped up very high because of fuel prices going up. And one of the immediate consequences was that the aluminum industry immediately basically collapsed. Right now, the industry that uses the most electricity is the steel industry. There is, for example, a large steel plant in Chiba Prefecture, which is suffering from electricity costs. As a result, it operates its factories only at night because daytime prices are much higher. So all of these things need to be considered. A simulation needs to be done, and then a decision needs to be made. This is what I explained to Mr. Hashimoto. He absolutely understands. As a result, in the past, no one in the government, no one in the bureaucracy could make these kinds of simulations, these kinds of analyses. We are planning to do so.
Okay, Joël.
Joël Lejean from RTL, French news station. Last time I saw you, I gave you a DVD of your brother, Yujiro. So I don't know if you remember that. We were talking about defense issue. I was very touched by what you said about Tibet, for I witnessed myself the crash of Chinese army on Tibetans. That was 20 years ago. It hasn't changed much. But I think the crucial question we have here in the relationship with China, for example, is what does a conservative like you, called nationalist sometimes, has in mind in expressing his changes, his desire of changes of military forces? You've been making many statements about defense. It's one of your priorities. You want to update and change and modernize the defense, make it maybe more as a deterrence than now, more deterrence than now. But the crucial question is, don't you think that people around you are going to see it as an offensive? And exactly what is your generation desiring in doing this sort of, propping up things about more military power, more, aggressivity into the foreign relations that you have with your neighbors? And in this regard, don't you think that sometimes to see the situations, in terms of diplomacy is better than to see just with the force of the gun? Thank you.
はい、フランスのテレビのものでございます。以前お会いしましたときには弟様が入っております DVD をお渡ししたんでございます。覚えてらっしゃらないかもしれませんが、チベット問題についてご発言非常に感動いたしました。私も20年前中国の軍隊がチベット人を非常に抑え込んだということもよく覚えております。しかしながら中国との関係について伺いたいんでございます。一応石原様は保守系の方というふうに見られているわけでございます。よくナショナリスト、愛国主義者、というふうには言われているのではないかと思うんでございます。しかしながらご発言を聞いておりますと、かなり日本をより強いものにしたい、軍事力を高めたい、軍事の装備もアップグレードしたい、また抑止力を、より強化したいというお気持ちなのかもしれませんが、やはりご発言を聞いておりますと、やっぱり聞いてる人によっては、これは日本をもっとオフェンシブ、攻撃的な力を、有してもらいたいというふうに受け止められる、かもしれません。つまり、防衛についていろんなご発言があるんですが、最終的にどのような、日本を、描いていらっしゃるんでございますでしょうか。そして、最後に聞きたいんでございますが、やはり軍事力を強化する、というよりは、やっぱり外交という、路線を追求した方がいい時もあるのではないんでしょうか。
非常に難しい問題でしてね、軍事的な抑止力というものを強く持たない限りですね、外交の発言力はないんですよ。ですからね、 例えばドゥゴールのようなですね愛国者はですね、原子力にというですね人間にとっての、ね、画期的な技術体系というものを外国人の手に任すわけにいかないということでフランスは核開発をした。私はね、彼はね見事な愛国者だったと思いますね。例えば日本がですね沖縄返還交渉している最中に非核三原則を唱えた佐藤栄作総理は、実はその前の相手のジョンソン大統領にですね、日本は核を保有したいんだと、だからアメリカのノウハウを渡してくれと言って断られた。で片っぽで非核三原則を唱えながらね、沖縄の返還交渉している相手がニクソンでしたが、その時に、ね、彼はねドイツにオファーしてですね、ドイツと一緒に日本は核の開発をしたいと言って、ドイツはまずその時東西に分かれていたんですね。プラハの春の事件もあったんで、非常にね西ドイツはソビエトをですね、神経質に考えていたために断られた。私はね佐藤さんというのはね、本当に人は二枚舌だというかもしれない。日本のメディアはそれを非難してますけど、そういう点では立派な政治家だったと思います。今のですね、世界の中でね、核を保有してない国の発言力で外交的に圧倒的に弱いじゃないですか。皆さん麻雀というゲームを知ってるかどうかじゃないけど、この頃麻雀はですね、イーファンという役を持ってないから上がれない、核を持ってない国の発言力が圧倒的にない。北朝鮮は核を開発するからね存在感ある。アメリカもハラハラするけどね、ミャンマーなんて国はですね核を持ってないから、同じ軍事政権でもね随分いじめられて批判されて、自由化に行ったから結構ですけどね、そういうもんですよ。I'm enjoying.
Sorry. It is a very, very difficult problem that you raise. The fact of the matter is that unless you're able to have enough military power to provide a deterrence force, you cannot have a significant voice in the diplomatic community. When we look back to Mr. de Gaulle, the leader of France, he felt very strongly that it was not right to leave this new technology that existed in the world, nuclear technology, in the hands of foreigners. And as a result, he pushed forth with developing nuclear technology among the French people. I believe that that was a wonderful example, a great example of a patriot, nationalistic person thinking about the future of his country. When the negotiations were continuing between the Japanese government and the U.S. government about the return of the Okinawan Islands, at that time it was postulated that Japan would issue the first 3 non-nuclear principles. Mr. Eisaku Sato was prime minister at that time, but before those negotiations took place, he had actually made a request to the previous president of the United States, Mr. Lyndon Johnson, saying that Japan wanted to be able to develop nuclear technology and could they please have access to it, and he was turned down. He was undaunted, however, and he tried to turn his attention to Germany, thinking that they might be able to work together to develop nuclear technology. However, Germany at that time was also in a very precarious or unstable position. It had been divided into East and West. They had just gone through the Prague Spring. They were very nervous, and so they also turned Japan down. I believe that Mr. Sato has been criticized by many people for being a person with 2 tongues, in other words, saying one thing and doing something else. However, I believe that from the point of view of someone who was looking after the interests of his nation, I think he is someone to be very much admired. So I go back to this original premise that unless you are able to have, frankly, nuclear powers, nuclear weapons, you really do not have a significant voice in the international stage. There is, the interpreter is not so familiar with the mahjong game, but Mr. Ishihara was giving the analogy of playing the game of mahjong, the Chinese tile game. And you have to have a specific tile called ihan, apparently, to be able to win. And without that, access to that specific tile, you will never be able to win. As an example of this, we see that there are 2 governments in the world that were military governments, Myanmar and North Korea. North Korea because they possess nuclear weapons. Of course, they are a very, very dangerous presence. Still, they were able to have their voice heard on the international stage, whereas Myanmar, because they did not have nuclear weapons, they had a much smaller voice. Of course, I think it's a good thing what's happened to Myanmar, that they have been forced now or have taken a new chapter in their lives and are becoming a democratic society. However,
皆さん考えていただきたい。世界の中の先進国の中でね、日本みたいな政治的なシチュエーションにある国、他にありますか？ロシアにはね、領土を奪われる、核を持っている。北朝鮮にはですね、状況紹介で言ったら200人、300人のね、日本人が拉致されて殺されて帰ってこない。隣の中国はですね、シナはですね、核を持ってですね、日本の領土を奪おうとしている。しかもその日本はですね、まあ、一種の平和ボケでね、アメリカに全て依存してですね、この国守ってもらうと見たけど、そのアメリカもだんだんこの工業が低下してきた。私たちはやっぱりね、尖閣の問題にしたってですね、自分でね、自分をとにかく血を流して守るんだって気概を持たなかった。アメリカは助けてくれませんわ。私はね、モンデルというね、非常に間違った認識を持っているアメリカの大使がね、尖閣で最初のホットフラッシュが、紛争が起こって、しかもですね、シナ人があそこに上陸してね、旗を立って追っ払った。当時その時ちょうど沖縄ではですね、黒人の海兵隊がです3人で小学校5年生の女の子を流辱してね、一家離散めちゃくちゃになった。その時にね、沖縄の人は本当に怒りましたよ。日本人も怒った。で、尖閣でのホットフラッシュがこれ以上激しくなった時に安保は発動するのかって言ったら、モンデルは厳下にノーと言った。私はこんなことを平気で言う大使を置いておいたら、日米関係おかしくなるんじゃない。私も政治家を引退した後でしたけどね、まだ知事になる前でしたね、論文に書いたらね、共和党の議員たちが共鳴し、向こうのスタッフ、向こうのね、いろんなインスティテュートのね、専門家もその通りだということで、モンデルはね、5日間でクビになった。その後のケント・カルダーというね、その大使の補佐官が初めて決まってね、私もこのアソシエイトメンバーですから、彼のスピーチをこれ聞きに来ました。アメリカの記者が、ね、あなたの人気はどれぐらいですかって、モンデルさんがいるからあと2、3年でしょうと言ったら、5日後にクビになったの。そういうことがありましたな。私はね、やっぱりね、しかしその前にね、日本人が自分の力でとにかく最低限自分の力で守るんだと。できないことはアメリカの助けもあるかもしれない、合うかもしれないけど、それがやっぱりね、民族の自主性だと思うし、危害だと思うしですね、本当の姿勢だと思います。
After all, I'd like for you to consider the situation that Japan faces. No other advanced nation of the world finds itself in a position as precarious as Japan. On the one, very close to us, we have Russia, which has taken some territories from us. They possess nuclear weapons. Very close by, we also have another nation, North Korea, which has taken, according to the facts available, the data available, some 200 or 300 of our citizens, abducted them and killed some of them. And also we have China, which is another country that has taken territories with which we have territorial issues and which have nuclear weapons. And yet, in spite of this terrible situation, Japan being kind of basically in a daze, what we call a peace daze, having been living in peaceful times for so long and expecting the United States to always step in and take care of them, has not really reacted to this very, very difficult situation. However, we see that the United States is perhaps not as committed as before, or willing as before, to step in and help us, as many Japanese may have thought. I believe very strongly that, in fact, if in regard to the Senkaku Islands, if the Japanese people themselves are not willing and determined to shed their own blood, we cannot expect the United States to step in and help. I am reminded of the situation with Mr. Mondale, who was an ambassador to Japan, who really did not understand the situation, or who had a mistaken understanding of the situation in Japan. It was a time when the Senkaku Islands were becoming a kind of hot flash, a point of contention between Japan and China. And there was also at that time an incident that occurred in Okinawa where 3 African-American military persons raped a young girl in 5th grade. It was an incident which caused great anger among the Okinawan and Japanese people. tensions, passions were quite inflamed, Mr. Mondale was asked if the Senkakus do become a flashpoint, will you intend to implement the U.S.-Japan Security Pact? And his response was no. I was so surprised by this, and I remember feeling extremely upset, and I thought this would lead to a deterioration of U.S.-Japan relations. I had already left my seat as a Diet member at that time, but I wrote papers and I visited some of my colleagues in the United States who belong to different, for example, think tanks and institutions, and they also quite agreed with me. I remember right around that time that Mr. Kent Calder, who was an assistant to Mr. Mondale, gave a speech. I went and listened, and he was asked by someone, how long do you think you will be in your current position with the U.S. Embassy? And he said, well, as long as Mr. Mondale is here for about 2 or 3 years more. 5 days later, Mr. Mondale was basically fired. But the point I would like to make is that you do have to stand up.
I apologize for all the people I can't ask to ask their question, but we have limited time.
フリーランスの小山ですけれども、防衛問題について言及されたのでお伺いしたいんですが、ご存知のように今日本の防衛は米軍が担当しています。それはそうでもないですよ。まあそういう防衛省の認識です。それを米軍に切り替えたいということなんでしょうか。日本防衛をですね、米軍じゃなくて自衛隊に切り替えたいと。
自衛隊そのためにあるんじゃないですか。自衛隊が動かずにですね、アメリカが動くわけないじゃないですか。
いやいや、ですからね、防衛は米軍が担当しているっていうのは、これは防衛省に聞いていただければ結構なんですけれども、まあ、それを米軍から自衛隊に切り替えるというそういう希望を持っているとしたらですね、まあ、防衛予算は10倍以上に、膨れ上がるだろうと思います。それから先ほどのモンデルの発言はですね、アメリカ大使館に確認された方がいいんじゃないかと思います。
I'm a freelancer. My name is Koyama. I'd like to ask about defense since you raised this issue. At present, the defense of Japan is considered to be the responsibility of the U.S., to which Mr. Ishihara said that's not so. However, Mr. Koyama believes that that is the understanding of the Ministry of Defense. And the question was, are you saying that what you want is for the Japanese government to take responsibility for Japanese defense, in other words, for the self-defense forces to stand up? And Mr. Ishihara's response was that that's what the self-defense forces are there for. They must take action. But the point was, if you are thinking that the defense of Japan should be left to the Ministry of Defense in Japan, that would mean that you would have to increase the defense budget by about 10 times. And in regard, I want clarification about your thoughts here. And secondly, in regard to your comments about Mr. Mondale, I believe that perhaps you should check with the U.S. Embassy to ascertain whether your understanding of events is correct?
非常にくだらない質問だと思う。あなたの名前なんておっしゃるの？小山さん。これアメリカ大使館に行ってですね、アメリカが何と答えると分かりそうなもんじゃないですか。そんなことでイエスと言うわけないでしょう。彼はプライドがあるんだろうから。もういいよ。
I don't admire the question, and basically what I'm saying is that it's pointless if I went to the U.S. Embassy and asked for clarification. Of course, do you think you can imagine already what they're going to say? In other words, they have their pride. They're not going to say what I believe to be the truth.
Yeah, the question was about increase of defense budget.
それはね、防衛費がね増やさないかんですね。今のね 1% を国家予算の 1% の規定をですね、誰が作ったか知りませんかね。私はそれにも反対したんですね。でね。しかもその 1% に満たない防衛費でしかないし、ね、それからね、日本のですね、その軍事産業の能力ってすごく高いんですけどね、それを抑制してきたのはアメリカです。例えば日本の航空産業を潰したのはアメリカですね。でアメリカの例えば軍用機のコックピットってのは、ね、全部日本製ですよ。これはね、ダッシュボードもそうですしね、そのクリスタルリキッドもね、その他この他ね、日本にはいろんな能力がある。例えばね、湾岸戦争の後のアメリカのリポート見てください。アメリカがね、あの時は中曽根さんがですね、レーガンの時にですね、アメリカに行ったね、日本の戦略関係の技術を提供していこうと、各銀を変えずに決めたんだ、彼は。これ憲法違反ですよ。しかし彼はそれ堂々とやった。 そのおかげでね、アメリカはね、湾岸戦争でね、いろんな利点を得てですね、あの戦争に簡単に勝てた。その後のね、ペンタゴンの報告書を読みましたか？イギリスはですね、8万の兵隊を送ってね、一緒に戦ったけど、日本がね、アメリカに与えた技術の供与ってのはね、その数十倍に匹敵すると言って12項目ありますよ。それぐらいの能力日本持ってるんだったら、ね、自前の防衛力を高めていいじゃないですか。そのために防衛産業ってのは、ね、裾野が広いんでね、日本の産業界も助かりますよ。中小企業も助かりますよ。
In regard to increasing the defense budget, I certainly do believe that the Japanese defense budget should be increased. I don't know who made this original provision that it should be held within 1% of the national budget. In fact, it doesn't even reach that 1%. I believe that the abilities and skills of the military industry is very, very high. In fact, it is something that the United States has worked very hard to hold down. In fact, the United States was the country that basically crushed the Japanese aviation industry. In other words, when we look at aviation, meaning airplane manufacturing industry, when we look at U.S. Plane cockpits, we see that much of it is made in Japan from crystal displays, etc. In fact, if you read the Pentagon report produced after the Gulf War, this was the time when Mr. Nakasone was head of Japan and Mr. Reagan was head of the United States. There was a decision made to provide technological support by Japan. It was a cabinet decision. It was considered to be against the Constitution, but it was passed anyway. And as a result, the U.S. forces were able to quite easily win in this conflict. If you read the Pentagon report, you see that the UK provided 80,000 soldiers. However, it was assessed that the technology from Japan had value of several tens of times that personnel support. In fact, there are 12 different specific categories of technologies that were presented. I believe, therefore, that Japanese military industry has great potential for growth, and we should support it. And it also has a very, very large base with many, many small and medium enterprises that could be supported as well.
Okay, we are coming to a close. I would like to ask everybody to remain seated until our guest has left, but I have a clarification, actually two. First question is, the positions you mentioned, like nuclear weapons and increase of military budget, are these your convictions or are these positions of your party? And secondly, if it comes to a coalition government, between your party and maybe the LDP, what ministry do you want? As head of a party, you should be able to ask for a ministry. What are you shooting at?
最後に2つの質問でございます。先ほど、その防衛予算を、上げるべきだ、あるいはその核兵器についていろいろご発言があったのでございますが、これはその、石原様個人の、お考えでございますでしょうか、それとも党の考えなのでございますでしょうか。で、2つ目でございますが、選挙の後にその連立政権をもし、作るといたしましたら、きっと日本維新の会と、自民党が一緒になるということも考えられますが、その時にはどの省の大臣になりたいと思いますでしょうか。
どの省の大臣もなるつもりありません。私は年寄りすぎますから。それからね、日本のこれからの要するに戦略兵器についてですけどね、オバマはね、世界のね核兵器をなくそうと言ってノーベル賞、ノーベル賞かなりいかないもんだから平和賞をもらった。それから半年も経たないうちに新しいですね核兵器のシミュレーションを始めましたね。私はね、核兵器に関するシミュレーションぐらい日本やったらいいと思う。これも一つの抑止力になるでしょう。持つ持たない先の話だけどもね。もう一つね、アメリカが今ね開発しつつあるねコンベンショナルストライクミサイルって新しい戦略兵器は、これはねその核弾頭をつけずに済むですね非常に強力的な致命的な役割を果たす兵器ですけど、ね、これはねノウハウを交換してですね、日本はそれを持ったらいいと思うし、持つための努力をですねしたらいいと思うし、アメリカはそれに協力すべきだと思いますが、例えばはやぶさのようなね、ああいうその火星の先まで行って土を取ってくる、ああいうその、宇宙開発の技術っていうのを日本持ってるんですからね、ああいうものをね要するに複合的に活用するね、戦略兵器の展開って日本ならできると思います。
First of all, I would not like to take any ministerial position. I'm too old for such a post. And secondly, in regard to strategic weapons for Japan, this is a complex topic. We see that Mr. Obama won the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize, for declaring that he wanted to rid the world of nuclear weapons. Of course, that makes me think about the fact that the Nobel Peace Prize is given for rather arbitrary reasons. It's not a very well thought out prize, perhaps. The reason I say this is that 6 months after this awarding, Mr. Obama began simulation work for a new generation of nuclear weapons. I believe, however, that Japan should at least begin simulation work for nuclear weapons, putting aside the fact whether it might eventually hold nuclear weapons or not. I think it should at least start these simulations, because by doing so, it will develop a stronger deterrence power. I also think there is something called the conventional strike missile. This is something that does not have to have a warhead attached, but can cause quite calamitous damage. It can play a very, very important role in strategic defense, and therefore I believe that the United States and Japan should share know-how or knowledge about this. I think Japan should have access to such knowledge, and the United States should cooperate in sharing this knowledge. And the reason I say this is that it would not be a one-way exchange. Japan has developed tremendous technologies of its own. For example, it has been able to launch this space vehicle, the Hayabusa, which went to Mars and brought back some, beyond Mars, brought back some samples from space. In other words, Japan has space development technologies. I think many of these different technologies could be put together and could be used for multiple purposes.
Okay, but the question was, are these your positions or the positions of your party?
そのさっきのご発言でございますが、これは、個人のお考えでございますでしょうか、それとも党を代表してということで。個人の意見です。My private opinions.
And to support you in your private opinions, we have, of course, not a one-year honorary membership, but I was told sake, I think, right? Because you are a member of the club already, we can't give you your one-year honorary membership.
通常は1年有効の会員名誉会員証をお渡しするんでございますが、すでに会員でいらっしゃるということでございますので、お酒をお土産にして差し上げたいということでございます。ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed.
And please remain seated until our guest has left. Thank you very much.